And we're live, Vanessa.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us for our Roadmap to Oil and Gas Community Impacts West Deer event. Joe and Tim, our local West Deer residents, are going to be guiding the beginning of our conversation as experts for what's been going on in West Deer. And so I will turn it over to them and let them share with everybody specifics about your community.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Joe Resinetti. This is my husband, Tim. Our hosts tonight are Vanessa Lynch from Mom's Clean Air Force and Lisa Graves Marcucci from the Environmental Integrity Project. Lisa and Vanessa have been instrumental in helping crowd members understand the process these well pad applications are going through, and both of them will be sharing their expertise with us in a little bit. Tim and I live off of West Stars Road in West Deer Township. We've been here in West Deer for about 11.5 years, and we're about 1.25 miles from the proposed Leto well pad site. We're going to have a lot of time for you to ask questions tonight. If you think of something that you want to ask as we go through some of the details about the process and the application, please type your question in the chat and we'll make sure to get you an answer at the appropriate time. We are supposed to have some people joining us by phone, which I don't really see anyone that's by phone just yet, but just to let you know, we were going to try to be pretty descriptive with the slides so that anyone who doesn't have the ability to see them will not be lost with what's going on. I'm going to start our slideshow. Tim's going to share the screen. And so I want to start out by giving you a brief overview of what's happened so far with the Leto and Dionysus well pad applications. And then Tim will go through some of the specifics about them. So this slide is a picture of an Olympus well pad that's across the river from Springdale. And you thought maybe that was in the completions stage, or?
Yes, that looks like they're fracking.
Okay. So first and maybe most important to understand is that Pennsylvania law requires municipalities to allow every use somewhere. Adult bookstores get used as an example a lot, but there's lots of things that people don't want to live next to that the township is still legally required to make a place for. They can't exclude anything completely. So the township has to consider these applications. They can't just throw them out and tell Olympus to get lost. There's a process that has to play out, and Lisa will explain a bit more about that tonight. Since the township is legally required to consider these applications, and we know that the Board of Supervisors will consider public opinion and comments in their decision, CROWD has 3 main goals. First, we want to notify West Deer residents about the plans for fracking, and hopefully all of you got a postcard in the mail, which went out to over 5,000 West Deer residents to notify them of what's happening. We want to ensure transparency in the decision-making process, and we want to educate residents and decision makers. Tonight's meeting is one way we're educating residents, and we want to make sure everyone is up to speed on what's happened already. Olympus Energy submitted conditional use applications for both sites in October of 2012. Olympus made a big presentation at the November Planning Commission meeting. Did I say 2012?
2019.
Sorry, it was 2019. It was a long time ago, but not that long ago. So October 2012, the applications came
2019.
2019. Needs to start poking me. November 2019, they came to the Planning Commission meeting and made a big presentation. Very few residents were present. Tim and I didn't know about the applications or the meeting, so we weren't there. The Planning Commission voted to table the applications that night. Olympus was supposed to return in December 2019 to answer the Planning Commission's outstanding questions, and they just didn't show up. They got on the agenda for February 2020, and by then, Tim and I had found out about the plans for drilling, and we were able to attend a big presentation by Olympus. The Planning Commission still had a lot of concerns, so they asked Olympus to come back the next month. That's when everything shut down because of the pandemic. Representatives from Olympus didn't attend another Planning Commission meeting until April of 2021. Tim and I have been going to all of the Planning Commission meetings, even when Olympus wasn't there, And we've had a growing group of crowd members that have been attending with us. We've sent in written questions to Olympus twice. We've had time to research this company, these applications, state law, and the township ordinance. And we've only had this time because the Planning Commission tabled the applications at the first meeting and then again at the second meeting. Last week, many of you were there when the Planning Commission voted to approve the Dionysus well pad with 52 conditions and did not recommend approval of the Leto well pad. The Board of Supervisors will consider these recommendations as part of the evidence at the public hearing that will happen later this summer. We aim to draw out as much of Olympus's plan for shale gas infrastructure as possible, which means not what's just being considered for these 2 well pads, but the pipelines, compressor stations, future well pads, and all of it. We're going to point out solid legal reasons to deny both well pads, and we hope that you'll attend the public hearing to show the supervisors that you support them in that decision. Here are some ways that you can help. I'd love for you to tell your neighbors and make sure if they didn't notice the postcard in the mail or the Facebook group or any other ways that we've been putting the word out into the community, make sure that they're aware of what's happening. Learn about the proposed sites. If you are on Facebook, you might have noticed that I'm posting details from the applications and things that were discussed at the Planning Commission meetings. It's really good to know what parts of the plan are still unknown and what has already been disclosed. One instance of that is I just recently posted a transcript of what was said about flaring at the February 2020 Planning Commission meeting. And they talked about how the industry doesn't flare to test a well anymore. So they don't do the really big, sounds like a jet engine. Lisa's making a face, so she might disagree with that. But he said that they never are going to flare like that. They're going to have the pipeline ready right away. But then he went through a progression of talking about all the different times they are going to flare on the pad and how big those flares are going to be and what those flares are for. So it's kind of important to know things that have already been said, because when we go back, we want to ask questions about, well, you know, you said there's going to be this flaring, which sounds, you know, like a pretty regular thing on the pad, and I want to know about that, rather than just going in and saying the thing about you're going to flare this like they did at the Pittsburgh Mills Mall, and I don't want that. So it just helps you kind of like put your questions into a way that, you know, gets to new information. The most powerful questions are the ones that help us uncover parts of the development that they really don't want us to know about, and to uncover information that's new to us so that we get all the parts of the plan. It's really important to attend the public hearing in person. We don't know the date, time, or location of that yet. The official deadline for it is still July 31st, but we are hearing that it's thought that the township and Olympus are going to come to an agreement to have it in August. So right now we're just planning as though it's going to happen in July with, you know, knowledge in the back of our minds that it could possibly be pushed to August. And the last thing is financial support through the Help Keep West Deer Families Safe GoFundMe. We have families that are in the very closest homes to the well pads have set up a GoFundMe so that they can have legal representation, someone who can look at the applications and the ordinances and help them make sure that the ordinances are being followed. So I just have a couple more quick things before I turn it over to Tim. We've been having, he did that to me. Okay, we've been having monthly crowd meetings. We started in January 2021 where we get together with a smaller group. We've been using Google Meet. It gives us a chance to talk about township meetings that have happened, share our research, and hear each other's concerns. So we'll be having another one of those meetings on Wednesday, July 14th at 7 p.m. That's 2 weeks from tonight. If you are interested in joining those meetings, please send us an email and I can get you the information to log on to the Google Meet for that. And This is my last one. Finally, there are residents near both proposed well pad locations that have private well water. We've been in touch with Dr. John Stoltz at Duquesne University about his Western PA Water Quality Survey program. If you'd like to have free testing done on your well, contact Dr. Stoltz by email to stoltz@duq.edu, or his phone number is 412-396-4367. They do recommend periodic testing for well water, even if there's not drilling nearby. But it's especially important to get baseline testings before they start development on these sites, if they are approved. So now Tim's going to go into more detail on the applications.
Okay, the first site I'm going to talk about is the Leto site. The official address of that will be 301 Oak Road. This is behind the Dollar General. So this is one of Olympus's submittals, and in case you didn't notice, I put in the chat a link to access basically all of Olympus's conditional use application for these two well pads. So feel free to check that out and look at things in more detail and get back to us with questions, but I'll go over things kind of initially for you here. So this is along Oak Road. So Oak Road's this thing down here. The blue outline around what is the well pad here. So the blue line is what's called the limit of disturbance. So everything that is related to the well pad should be contained within the limit of disturbance. So any earth moving, all erosion and sedimentation controls, the access road, security gates, fences, underground drains. There's actually kind of a lot of stuff that will be inside of that limit of disturbance and outside of the well pad. But the well pad itself is this kind of rectangular thing in the middle. That's where the wells are approximately centered inside of that, where they'll be doing the drilling. The red lines and the arcs around here show 650 feet. The red lines are all 650 feet. And the reason it's 650 feet is that's what our ordinance requires. That's West Deer Township's ordinance for the distance that a pre-existing building has to be from the site. So, there's obviously some issues with this, where these red lines that go all the way through the pad and through the limit of disturbance. That's something we can get into a little bit later, I suppose. There's a lot more detail about these developments available in the other documents, and if you guys have specific questions, I'd be happy to bring them up to show you, exactly what they say is going to be on the well pad, depending on how much time we have and whatnot. But so to the northwest of the pad, this area over here is that's just a private house that has a long driveway off of Middle Road Extension. To the northeast, this is just giving you guys an idea where it is. This is a house and a barn that is basically at the intersection of Bairdford Road and Kaufman Road. To the east, closest over here is Hemlock Street. To the south is the Berry Acid Mine Discharge Treatment Facility. So this is that big pond that is shades of orange and brown that I'm sure you all see. Next up is what Olympus has submitted as their haul route. So they claim that, well, at one point they say this is the way all of their trucks will drive or will come in to access the well pad. That there are some caveats to that, but basically from Route 8 to Route 910 to Oak Road to the well pad. These are all state-owned roads, so the state has issued highway occupancy permits for these. There's been a traffic study done on this route with that has highlighted some issues. Olympus has actually come out and said in a meeting that their contractors, because well, I digress. The contractors might use other routes and there's still outstanding questions about the use of other routes, but the applicant insists that township roads will never be used. One big outstanding question is the most volume of traffic will come from hauling water into the site. And Olympus's only source of water, so the DEP has to approve their sources of water. The only one anywhere close to around here is off of Saxonburg Boulevard, north of Bakerstown Calmerville Road. Basically, if you're headed north on the right side of the road, there's kind of a gravel lot that has some modular buildings and some looks like containers there. That's actually a DEP approved water draw site for Olympus. So if they do end up bringing water from that location, the haul route seems to be a problem for them to comply with. They have admitted that traffic includes oversized loads and overweight loads, but they haven't told us how many. And they have stated that truck trips will be as often as every 5 minutes, 24 hours a day at some phases of the development. Next up is the emergency response plan for the Leto pad. The impacted neighborhoods, Bairdford, Oakwood Heights, especially the planned phase 2 and phase 3 of Oakwood Heights would be, which kind of butt up against Bairdford Park, Lick Road, Kaufman Road, Monier Road, and Bairdford Park itself. The orange circle is a 1/2 mile evacuation buffer, and the yellow circle is a 1 mile evacuation buffer. Notable about the Leto site is that most of the homes, at least the density of homes, are within the 1/2 mile evacuation buffer. Bairdford Park is within the 1 mile evacuation buffer. We've asked many questions about this, and the Olympus's position on this is that evacuation zones and emergency notifications will be handled by local first responders. Their emergency response plan, which is again included in that link, is they basically call 911. And kind of following on with that, the evacuation route and evacuation location, that's kind of this red and black dotted line and this black star outlined in red. That's only for their employees. That has nothing to do with our residents. This is when something happens on their site that they need to get out of there, it's only for them. Everything associated with the community, residents, activities at the park, it's 100% on our local responders.
And that takes their employees to the Dionysus well pad.
Yes, and you might notice that that red star is actually within the 1 mile evacuation buffer. So needless to say, we have some questions. Next up, we'll go to the Dionysus project. The official address on that will be 1501 Middle Road Extension. This is above and behind where the Pro Motorsports, which I think closed down just a couple months ago off of Route 910 is. So this is the proposed siting for Dionysus off of Middle Road Extension. You can see that the sharp bends off of Middle Road Extension. The pad is directly to the east of that, roughly centered between Middle Road Extension and Oak Road. So it's on the top of the hill. There's kind of a plateau there that they'll have to level. And the access road is further up Middle Road Extension. There's kind of a little bit of an access road, or maybe it's used for mowing or something.
There's a gate there already, it seems like, right?
Yeah, there's a gate there. So that it's roughly in that area. It's a little bit, a couple feet off from there, but that'll be where the truck traffic comes in and out of the Dionysus site. Again, the red lines and the arcs are the 650-foot setback. To the north is a home on Middle Road Extension. That's actually the home of the leaseholder that leased their surface rights to put this pad in. To the east, directly to the east of the pad, is the Mish Market. They say it's 755 feet from the Mish Market. I don't know if you can read that on your screens. And down here to the south, that's the Pro Motorsports. To the southwest here, there's a couple businesses. Not too much to say about that other than that. Okay, this is the proposed haul route for the Dionysus site. Again, Route 8 to Route 910, and then to Middle Road Extension. 910 state owned. Middle Road Extension is actually county owned. So Allegheny County has to, I believe they've actually already issued the highway occupancy permit, but there's a lot more that's going to have to go into that. And we know there are a lot of resident concerns about the sharp bends on Middle Road Extension that actually can't accommodate a tractor trailer, you know, a normal size one, not even considering oversized or overweight. Olympus is in discussions with Allegheny County Department of Public Works about required upgrades to Middle Road Extension. We're still trying to draw that information out, even though these drawings, a lot of the date, the date on this one is October 1st of 2019. So we're talking, you know, it'll be 2 years by the time the public hearing's over, but yet we still haven't seen what their plans are for Middle Road Extension. One thing to know is that everyone agrees there will be 24-hour traffic control required on these sites. I believe that one of the conditions that the Planning Commission came up with last week for this was that West Deer Police would have to do any traffic control. They couldn't hire a private contractor that'll have to do flagging 24 hours a day because trucks are coming potentially every 5 minutes, and it will essentially be one way at the time. It's a concern that this road, that Middle Road Extension will, at least the lower part of it here, will become very difficult for our residents to use. The concern with water trucks also exists on this. So the same site up on Saxonburg, north of Bakerstown, Calmerville Road. We still don't know how water trucks from there might get to this site. And the emergency response plan for Dionysus. So again, we have the half-mile evacuation buffer in orange, the 1 mile in yellow. Something interesting, well, interesting might not be the right word, concerning here is that we have a lot of homes within the 1 mile evacuation buffer, but not as many within the half mile that we had at the Leto site. But the number that are within that 1 mile is concerningly high for this type of a development. The evacuation location is it's kind of an empty parking lot that right now the Narcissi Winery uses that, I think, as overflow parking. That's across Route 910, you know, approximately across from Narcissi Winery. And again, the evacuation would have to be completely handled by our local first responders. Olympus calls 911, and then they get their own people out. Next up, this is not one of Olympus's drawings. This is kind of one of our own members put this together for us. This shows the approximate area that would be where the laterals from the wells would go, so the horizontal drilling. Factually, drilling through Marcellus Shale, horizontal drilling, always goes in the same direction. No matter where in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, or Ohio, the Marcellus Shale is consistent in the direction that joints of the formation go, and they always have to drill horizontal or perpendicular to those joints. So it's nearly exactly northwest and southeast. The laterals shown here, the red lines, these are drawn 2 miles out from the well pad. Olympus has said their average lateral length is somewhere between 7,000 and 14,000. But just earlier this year, they set a record for the region of drilling almost 4 miles from their Midas well pad. So we're looking at an area that will have the horizontals under it all the way up to, Bakerstown, Calmerville Road and past it. The green box here are the West Deer Township borders. So nearly the entire southwest part of West Deer would be potentially an area where they would be looking to get gas out of.
Okay, so then the last thing is some notes on the applications and how they comply with West Deer Township ordinances. We found several areas where their applications do not comply. As I noted at the beginning, West Deer Township has the authority to say where drilling occurs. So all of our concerns are really important and valid. All of the health and safety concerns, evacuation plans, noise, traffic, vibration, smells, dust, all those kind of things are things that we want to bring up. The township's main way that they can address those concerns for residents is by putting this development further away from our homes. The conditions that were mentioned last week that will be sent to the Board of Supervisors, we haven't seen those written out yet. I made an attempt at writing them all down. The commissioner, the chairman, Mark Schmidt, kind of went through them very quickly, and I did my best to mark them down, but we will be getting the official document from the township hopefully next week that'll have those conditions spelled out. We're going to want to look through those very closely to make sure that those are actually things that are enforceable by the township. And an important note I want to make is that if the township denies the applications, or even if they approve them with 50+ conditions, it's very likely that the applicant will appeal the decision and it'll go to court. So the township has to be careful that they're very legally justifiable reasons. And that's what we've been trying to do as a community group, to bring those very, cut and dry legal reasons to them. And then also have the support of the community to say, we need to make sure that we're protected by having this further from our homes so we don't have to deal with these impacts. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, I think Tim and I are done then, so I will throw it over to Vanessa.
Well, I hope we get to answer a lot of questions later.
Right.
Yes,
was gonna
we'll
stay here.
absolutely for sure be answering lots and lots of questions. I just want to thank Tim and Joe for an amazing presentation. I hope other residents of West Deer understand how much time and energy and dedication these two have put into learning absolutely everything there is to know about what's going on for your community, and really have been amazing advocates. So kudos to you two for some really amazing work. I'm going to work to start my sharing for my portion of the presentation. So just give me a moment. I'm gonna try that one more time. Wasn't letting me advance to actually start this show, so let me try that again. All right. Well, Lisa, maybe do you want to go first? And I will close down my PowerPoint and restart it and hope it works.
Sure, that's fine. Hopefully mine will work. Okay, can everybody see that? Tim and Joe, can everybody see that?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, great. So thank you again to Tim and Joe for getting this whole process started. They've done an amazing job being very quick studies and bringing so much factual information to this entire process. And we're glad that you're with us tonight. As Vanessa mentioned, I'm with the Environmental Integrity Project. We're a nonprofit that is, most of EIP staff is their attorneys. A number of them are former attorneys from the United States Environmental Protection Agency. I am not an attorney. I am the Pennsylvania Coordinator of Community Outreach, and I help the citizens understand the very complicated and find ways to take the complicated application materials or the enforcement process or oversight process and make sure that citizen teams get seats at the table. Okay, mine's not advancing either, Vanessa. Okay, anybody technologically able to help?
Lisa, you sent it to us, so we could probably share it and do it.
That'd be great if you wouldn't mind doing
Give
it.
that a shot.
You might have to
Mine-
try clicking the screen where the slide is first and then hitting like space bar.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, technology guru, Tim. So you've heard it mentioned here a couple times tonight. The next big thing that we need to be preparing for is a public hearing. This is required in Pennsylvania when local government is considering something like an application for this type of development, and it falls under what they call conditional use. So a public hearing is the opportunity for all voices to be heard. No matter what side of the issue you're on, everyone has an opportunity to testify. What's most important about this is that local residents who are directly impacted, when the hearing opens, we need to either find out in advance or at the start of the hearing how you would ask for what they call party status or standing. And what that means is that if you live close enough and you are directly impacted in some way by one or both of these well pads, or you have well water, the township will set up a criteria that they will use to determine who is directly impacted. You want party status or standing because if a decision is made that you don't agree with, the citizens could hire an attorney to challenge that decision. But only those people who have standing or party status who are directly impacted by this decision and this development would have that legal opportunity. It's important to know that a public hearing is a one-way conversation. When you arrive, you will participate by when they call your name, you'll go up and you'll speak, but no one can answer you. A lot of people who've not been through this before sometimes find that offensive because your questions aren't being answered. They're legally not allowed to. So that is something to keep in mind. You can ask questions, and at the end of it, they have to provide what they call a findings of facts and conclusions of law, and they have to answer people's questions when they make their decision. But just know going into it that you will not hear any response back, and that's okay. That's part of the process. It's also important to know that this is part of a federal or a state required quasi judicial procedure. It's very formal. You'll hear them enter exhibits on the record. They'll cross-examine witnesses. This is very formal, but do not be intimidated. It is called a public hearing for a reason, and it is because this is your venue in which to speak. Preparing your testimony. And this is something that if you are very interested in this and you want to join some of the crowd meetings, you are welcome to do that. We're going to be talking about how to prepare your testimony. I have at the end of this, I have some links to some tutorials on some fact sheets that you can use in researching and preparing what you might want to say or what you might want to submit in writing. But when you are getting ready to prepare, there will be a public notice in the local newspaper. It gives the scope of the public hearing, and we have to stay within the confines of that. It'll say what we're there to talk about and what the decision that they're considering making. And that's how we would know which subject matter is allowed to be introduced, and anything other than that should be held for another meeting. It's really important to write your comments down. It's, when you get up, no one really likes public speaking. And so when you get up to speak, you may be nervous and you don't want to miss your, valuable points that you want to make. So I always encourage people to write it out and include your personal concerns with facts. And you heard Tim and Joe provide a lot of really good facts tonight. We will also be sharing more facts as the weeks and months go by. So we want to help you, if you're interested, to take all of those personal concerns, marry them up with facts, and I'll tell you why in the next few slides. If you do write it out, which I strongly encourage, do bring 2 copies to the hearing, one that you will read from, one that you will give to the stenographer. This is a formal proceeding, like in a courtroom, there will be a court stenographer, and they always appreciate having a copy because they then can transcribe your comments more accurately. Really important, be professional and be respectful. We may not agree with what's being said by the applicant. We may not like what's being proposed, but we don't want to be viewed as anything other than factual and professional. It helps the township take our concerns, and most specifically the local citizens' concern, more seriously. I always remind people about the golden rules when you're speaking publicly in a scenario like this. And I have a link, we have a citizens toolkit on our website, and this is the link directly to that page. But you can also get there by just Googling PA Citizens Toolkit Environmental Integrity Project. Number one thing is you can state a fact. As Tim showed you, he has lots of documents right out of their applications. You can print that out, you can bring it, you can point to it and say, I'm concerned about this, and here's the map to show it, or here's the document to show it. You can share your opinions. You can say things like, the way I understand it, the way I read it, it's my opinion, I'm concerned because of my personal feelings. Those are all protected under free speech. And most importantly, if you have a concern that you don't have a fact for, but you want to really emphasize, you don't want to accuse anybody of anything, because we don't want anybody to come back at the citizens team and say they weren't being factual, they're not to be trusted. We want to stay on the high road on this. It's very important. So we don't want to accuse anybody, but you could say something like, are we to understand that the evacuation plan means that the company is really only concerned about their workers and not about any of us? How do we protect us? Things like that. You can word it in the form of a question, but just don't accuse anyone, because that's not really something we want to do to cause some other additional division in the community. Now, it's really important that when you ask local government to do something, like they are in charge of protecting public health, safety, and welfare is their number one charge. And also, as Joe indicated, they can say where this is located, and they have the jurisdiction to govern land use and certain types of operations. So it's important that you ask them to do things that are legally within their scope of work, legally within their jurisdictional duties. And number one is the importance of protecting public health, safety, and welfare. And number two is point out, as Joe and Tim have indicated, where the applicant fails to meet the current ordinances. Really important that you give the governing body reasons to deny, or reasons to put harsher conditions, or whatever the case may be. Your personal concerns aren't going to be enough to move them to make the appropriate decision or take the appropriate safeguards or actions. You have to do it in a way that they're legally allowed to do it. So one of the main things you can look up if you want, the local governance is all comes under, this is sort of the rule book for them. It's called the PA Municipalities Planning Code, or MPC. And if you look up in the very first section, the scope of the MPC is the is the intent and the purpose and the scope of this is to protect and promote safety, health, and morals, and to accomplish coordinated development. So when all else fails, and as often as you can possibly say it, you want to remind the elected officials that all that they do falls under the jurisdiction of the PA MPC, and under that, the number one charge they have is to protect public health, safety, and welfare. Again, just to reiterate, when you consider that MPC and how you're putting together your testimony, you want to underscore that importance of that public health, safety, and welfare aspect and the deficiencies that we've talked about. And it's really important. Our role here is to raise reasonable doubt using the facts. As Tim said, people are encouraged, very strongly encouraged, to attend in person, even if you're not going to speak. It shows solidarity. It shows the local leaders, if they have to make a tough judgment call one way or the other, it shows that people are there, they're concerned, and they're actively participating in this. You can present oral testimony. If you're not comfortable with that, you can always present written testimony, but you have to do it in the confines of that open hearing. And you can just get up and say, I'd prefer to just hand in my written testimony if that's okay. And they'll take that and you can sit down. Personal and factual testimony, I can't underscore it enough. It's key. And it's really important that a unified message be coming from the citizens who have concerns. And that's where attending some of the crowd meetings will be helpful. It will give you the opportunity, as you heard Joe, one of the things to keep in mind is a well pad is never standalone. And this is something that I call, and I've deemed egg slicer permitting. They want to build a whole infrastructure, but they only want to give it to you one piece at a time. We don't want that to happen. We want to encourage West Deer Township to require them to put all their cards on the table. The well pad, the gathering lines, the pipelines, the pigging operations, the compressor stations, the processing plants, all of that will blossom out of this one well pad or these two well pads, whatever the case may be. They're not standalone, and this is going to be a highly industrialized web of activity. And I really encourage citizens and local leaders to require all the cards be put on the table so that a factual and fully informed decision can be made. I don't think anybody should be required to make a decision about a piece of something that's going to be this very large structure later. Everything has to be revealed in total to start. And to Joe's point, this is an example. If the company says, we're going to do this, that, or the other, we're not going to flare, we are going to flare, I don't believe anything until it's in writing and it has an enforceability. Just to wrap it up, this is what two of the fact sheets look like. If you go to our citizens toolkit, that's the link. This is public hearings, and it gives you several pages of what to expect when you attend a public hearing. And the one on the right is how to prepare my testimony. It reiterates a lot of what we talked about. Sometimes at public hearings, they do limit, if there's a lot of speakers, they may say 3 to 5 minutes, whatever. We've heard, in both ways. Sometimes in hearings, I've heard that people get as much time as they want. If there are a lot of speakers, they may, just for the time period, they may restrict it. So just be aware, just to sort of keep yourself in, a reasonable time limit. I'm thinking if everybody prepared for 5 minutes, that's 150 words equals 1 minute. And that gives you an opportunity to sort of gauge how much you would want to put on your paper. So thank you very much. We'll, of course, be taking lots of questions. I know there are probably many if you're new to this process, but we will be here tonight to answer most of those. And again, we're going to be staying in contact with the crowd group and hopefully helping you throughout this process. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Lisa, for lots of great information about our hearings. I'm going to try this share my screen thing again. We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
All right. Did it work? Can everyone see it?
Yay. Yes.
All right, good. Okay, so I'm Vanessa Lynch, Pennsylvania field organizer for Moms Clean Air Force. We're an organization of around 96,000 moms and dads in Pennsylvania united against air pollution to protect our children's health. I thought I would start just by backing up just a little bit to make sure that everybody understands the kinds of well pads that we're talking about. So over the last 65 years or so, conventional drilling has been a part of what's gone on in the US, and you can see that depicted on the left side of this slide. But over the last 10 years, unconventional wells or fracking have become much more common. And fracking well pads have a 1 mile deep vertical drilling, and then they can go up to 3 or 4 miles in a horizontal direction. Fracking water is injected into these wells and used to fracture the shale or break it apart. And that's brought in either through truck traffic or pipelines that bring water in. The fracking water itself includes sand and other chemicals that are forcefully sent down into the well, and the sand holds open the fractures that are made to allow the gas to be released. And refracking, so going back and fracking again, is a common occurrence over the course or lifetime of a well pad. In Pennsylvania, I'm sure you've asked yourself how many people live close to oil and gas facilities. And the answer is 1.5 million people live within a half mile of an oil and gas facility. 300,000 students attend school or daycare within that same half mile. And this map in the back is brought to us by our friends in Earthworks. Each of the sort of spots that you see on the map are that half mile radius from an oil and gas facility. So there are a lot of us who live very close. This slide is a picture of Indiana Township, where I live, your neighbor. This is our well pad. And as you can see, a lot of times we have the impression that a well pad is just this one piece of infrastructure. And over the course of tonight, I think you've heard, and I think these pictures depict really well, it isn't just one piece. It's things like truck traffic. We did in Indiana Township have pipelines that brought water into our well pad, but it still required truck traffic on our roads. And that truck traffic had a staging area where trucks met. So they didn't come straight into the well pad. They parked, they waited, a number of them got together and then came in all at the same time. The turn onto the road to get to our well pad was a very sharp turn. And so our Indiana Township Police had to direct traffic. The road leading up to the well pad had an older bridge, which was highly damaged by the truck traffic that went through that had to be repaired. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner of these pictures, a compressor station. And all of this is a part of what happens in a community whenever a well pad is placed. The picture in the center is the gathering pipelines underground and all of the trees that had to be cleared in order for space to be made for that. So it's not just that one spot in your community that's affected. It really is more than that. It really is bigger. And unfortunately, whenever we're talking about oil and gas well pads, we have to also talk about the air pollution that comes from these well pads. Methane is an invisible and odorless gas, and it is the primary component of natural gas. And where methane is released, it lives with volatile organic compounds. And methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, and volatile organic compounds are very powerful chemicals that can cause serious health impacts. So when Lisa's talking about the public health, safety, and welfare being the primary charge of our local governments to care for and protect, things like methane release and volatile organic compounds are really important to that conversation because of the ways they impact our community. So why do they matter? Well, methane is a greenhouse gas that contributes to 25% of our current climate change. And anyone who has seen the flooding and landslides that have gone on in my community in O'Hara Township, which is part of the Fox Chapel Area School District, or I'm sure in communities like yours, or the increases in Lyme disease and the occurrence of vector-borne diseases, that's all related to climate change. The heat waves in the West right now, you can point to and understand as part of that process. The other really important thing to understand when it comes to public health are volatile organic compounds. These can affect health, and they include things like benzene, which can cause cancer, and other toxins like formaldehyde, and can lead to the creation of smog, which can cause respiratory issues. So how oil and gas affect public health? We know that there's increasing evidence that the fetuses are vulnerable to a range of pollution exposures through their mother. Research done in Pennsylvania, Colorado, and Texas have found associations between pregnant women living near oil and gas operations and an increase in adverse health outcomes like congenital heart defects, preterm birth, low birth weight, high-risk pregnancies, and infant mortality. Other studies have found increased risks of cancer and asthma. The little girl in this picture on the right-hand side, her name's Odessa, and she is now 11 years old. And I just watched her participate in a press conference where she talked about all of the things that her family has to do living in Washington County, surrounded by oil and gas infrastructure. She talked about having whole house water filtration so that they can safely cook and clean and bathe. She talked about having air filtration systems in every room of her house and having to keep their windows closed to avoid nosebleeds and rashes from the water that they were using. These well pads are highly industrial. And in Pennsylvania, we are placing them in residential communities. And these are the kinds of health impacts that we should all be concerned about and we should all be asking questions about. So why are children so particularly vulnerable? Well, children have a higher respiratory rate and breathe in more toxins per pound of body weight than adults. They don't clear toxins from their body as efficiently as grown-ups because of their growth and development and reasons related to that. Children's brains and lungs are still developing and will be until early adulthood. So in this picture, you can see Olivia, and she's playing at the Summit Elementary School playground in Butler County. And while the elementary school is 700 feet from the well pad, this playground that she's playing on is clearly closer because our setback requirements are 2 buildings. This is another family, Jane Worthington and her children are shown here. This is the Fort Cherry School District in Washington County. You can see where their school is located in relation to a well pad. And coinciding with well pad activity near her school, Jane Worthington reported that her daughter developed asthma-like symptoms, infected eyes, gastrointestinal problems, nosebleeds, rashes, joint swelling and pain, headaches, and was subsequently diagnosed with benzene exposure. There were 22 gas wells surrounding the Fort Cherry School District, so it was a high density area, but subsequently Jane and her kids decided to move to a different school district because of their concerns about their health. I say all this to say that your concerns are highly valid and your story is highly important to this process. Being an advocate for your community and what is best for your children and your families is highly powerful. So when it comes time to participate in this West Deer hearing, to talk about the well pads going in and their impacts on your families and on your children, these are conversations that are highly important. If you want to learn more about oil and gas air pollution, you can check out Moms Clean Air Force's Face to Face with Oil and Gas report. And I with Moms Clean Air Force are doing advocacy work at the state level on protective regulations for methane release during the oil and gas process. And so if you wanted to get involved in that, we are always happy to have as many people involved as we can. So at this point, why don't we all, I will try to stop sharing my screen and we can all go ahead and unmute, and we will work on some of our questions that have come in. So I know one of the questions that I had seen, Tim and Joe, when you were talking about evacuation routes, was what kind of events lead to the need for evacuation in that half-mile and mile radius from a well pad?
So the biggest and most concerning thing immediately is a blowout. That's the thing that the radius around the well that has a blowout that would be affected. Lisa, do you, I mean.
Well, there was an article I just posted about Belmont County that they had to evacuate a mile, and those people were out of their homes for 3 weeks because they lost control of the well.
Right.
And I was real quickly locally, in Indiana Township off Rich Hill Road, not too far from us, there was a conventional well that had an explosion. I believe our local first responders actually responded to that. And if you look up Rich Hill Road well explosion, gas well explosion, you'll see the Trib and the Post Gazette reporting on it. Firefighters couldn't get within maybe 700 feet of that. The fire was so hot and it burned for days. Go ahead, Lisa.
And I was going to say that a couple things. First of all, I've been working with communities and a number of my colleagues are even listening in tonight. When there is a well event, they call it an event, and it's usually a blowout and a fire, right? They don't even handle it themselves. They call in a crew. One of the crews, there's like a handful of them that do this. They're specialized firefighters. And one of them is called Boots and Coots, and they come in from Texas and they basically let it burn out, because we have heard it in some testimony that the first responders' typical turnout coats, like the gear that firemen wear when they arrive on scene in our area, it can't withstand the heat. So typically all of the first responders are told to stand down. These specialized trained companies like Boots and Coots come in and they take over. And it is usually something that they just let burn out, especially if there's active gas still coming through the line. The other thing that's really important to understand, and this is something I really want to impress on people, your local government doesn't know what they don't know. They don't even know the right questions to ask because they have never been through this kind of approval process before. This is highly industrialized stuff that typically takes place in Texas and Louisiana and Oklahoma. It's only been here for about 10 years. And luckily, some community members have taken what lessons learned in especially Washington and Greene County and paid it forward to other counties like Allegheny. So one of the things I really want to touch on is that, for example, if there were to be an emergency, and Tim's right, they only are responsible for their employees within their permitted boundary, their gated area. They'll get them out and they bug out and everybody else is left pretty much standing back while these specialized trained crews go in there. But the really important thing is, what if that happens and it's near a school? What if it happens during school hours? What's the plan? Where are the children taken? How parents noticed that notified that the children are leaving the school? Where do they hold them? Is it like a reverse 911 message, or do they get individual calls? Do they get knocks on the door? These are the hosts of questions that you should be thinking about asking at these public hearings, because you have to help your local government. They don't know some of the questions they even need to be asking. So what we did in some of the communities was we came up with a checklist of questions, unanswered questions, to just say, look, you don't have the answers to these. And until you do, these shouldn't be approved because you can't guarantee our public safety. So those are things we can talk about. If you're interested, we have lists of questions that we've developed in other communities. We're happy to share that. So don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel, but that's just an example of the list of unanswered questions that really needs to be brought forward in this public forum.
So there's another question sort of related. What about blowouts of the gathering lines, the pipelines that are used to take the gas away from the well pad? These can be even closer to homes and in the neighborhoods themselves. And this individual mentioned the Beaver County explosion that occurred. How does that work, and how concerned should people be about that?
So that was the Revolution Pipeline, and it was in September of 2018, and it blew up behind the homes on Ivy Lane in Center Township. There's still an investigation ongoing. There's an alphabet soup of government agencies that are still investigating, but the root cause of it was the fact that it was placed in unstable soil, and the heavy rains like we had today washed out the earth beneath the pipeline, and it moved and it ruptured and caused this, literally ball of fire. They were very fortunate that only one home was lost, and no human life was lost. Animals were lost, but humans were not. But it does raise a very big question as to, there are certain things that local government has jurisdiction over, and there's certain things they don't. Unfortunately, they don't have jurisdiction over the placement of pipelines. That's a different, that's part of this whole process. There's a menagerie of agencies that have different jurisdictions. And there's, in my experience, not a lot of communication. Everybody's sort of siloed, and there's not often enough communication. So if people were concerned about the pipelines, that is something to still bring up, that you have concerns about that, and you might relate the stories, look for the news stories about the Revolution Pipeline in Beaver County. But having the well pads moved back could potentially impact the pipeline routes. So if there were some protective measures taken, I think, to move the well pads back to less populated area, then perhaps it might have an impact on where the pipelines would be placed, and ultimately how close would they then be to people's homes. But it's all about making sure as much information is discussed publicly, and as much emphasis as possible can be placed on the unanswered questions and the concerns for public safety.
During the course of the presentation, flaring was mentioned, but venting is also something that occurs at well pads. Can we just maybe talk a little bit about what those are and how those work at a well pad?
Yes. So part of what happens in relationship to what goes on the well pad, they have the bore holes, which are the holes that they go or vertically into the ground. Those are the well heads. And usually it's important to understand that a well pad does not just have one well head. Typically they're between 8 and I've seen as many as 20. So I think, Tim and Joe know how many are proposed for each one of them. I think it's around 8 or so for each one. But there's other things that are associated with that. And one of them is pig launchers and receivers. And that's where I've seen a lot of venting and flaring. And what happens is in our region, the gas is wet. And because it's wet, it's heavy and it settles in the lines. And so they have these things, and it was in your slide, Vanessa, with that lower left-hand corner with those pipes that come out of the ground partway. There's a valve on the top of it, and they occasionally open that valve, and they have to clean the lines by dropping in this auger they call pig. But when they open the valve, it vents, and it's a very large whoosh, almost like a jet engine. And it was happening very frequently near the Fort Cherry School, near 2 homes actually in that area. And those 2 families petitioned for a health consultation from an agency that's under the umbrella of the CDC, and it's called the ATSDR, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And they did a study on the venting this whoosh of pollution that comes out of these pipes. And although the ATSDR does not have any legally binding authority, they make recommendations. And they've made recommendations that instead of opening it while there's a lot of gas flowing through the lines, like sometimes it's 1,000 or 1,100 PSI, that they recommend bringing the pressure down to like 100 before they open it. And they also have asked that it not happen during certain meteorological conditions, like when there's in the summertime in our area in the valleys where we get inversions, and it would bring that pollution down close to those families, and they were breathing that formaldehyde and that benzene. So that recommendation was made. The company involved in that particular case was Mark West. They volunteered to abide by that voluntarily to the DEP, and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette did an article, very good article about that. But the other thing that we might want to think about is talking about, in the future, as you're reaching out, on the state level, Vanessa, is talking about maybe getting every company to abide by that, not just voluntarily, but to reduce the venting near these well pads. It would be really helpful if we know that the lead agency that studies the impacts of toxins on the human body has made this recommendation. That's something that we could mention. Obviously that this report exists. That's a fact that could be brought forward in the public hearing, but the jurisdiction to require that is not at the local level. It would be at the state level.
What, if anything, does the West Deer town, like the township itself, get from allowing well pads to be constructed? Are there any things that they get by allowing these well pads?
Municipalities are paid impact fees, which Lisa might be able to go into a little bit more. I'm a little bit hazy on the details of how impact fees are calculated, but they're calculated off of the prevailing market rate of natural gas and how much impact there is to the municipality. So West Deer has already been collecting impact fees from drilling, probably because roads are used for other well pads. And the township also has, 2014, they leased the parks. So they do have gas leases.
They're all township property.
So if any of those leased properties were part of the drilling pool for either of these well pads, that'd be paid royalties on that. One important thing to note, though, is that the Board of Supervisors can't have that enter into their decision. So I don't know, I might throw it over to Lisa for more of the specifics on that part.
Yeah, so the PA Supreme Court said that when decisions like this are made on land use, that every level of government, state, local, county, they have to act as trustees of the land. So no matter what economic benefit is being offered, that cannot be the primary reason for their decision. Their decision has to be where it can be located and on which types of land and in which zoning districts. Like, no one at the local level can regulate, but they can place things appropriately in compatible zones. Now, the impact fee is there's a fund that, money is doled out basically by the county, and the counties that are mostly it's basically how much damage are you willing to take? So the counties like Washington, Greene, and Fayette, they signed on for a whole lot of damage. They get a whole lot of impact fees. That's what people have to understand. Impact fees is not a benefit, in my opinion. Impact fees is a acknowledgement that you're going to suffer damage. And this is sort of to offset, in a way, not really, in my opinion, but to offset the damage that is going to come with this type of development. So that's something to keep in mind, that, when you maybe present to your local officials, you might want to consider saying, look, this will bring damage. And even though some may look at it as there's going to be potentially some economic benefit, we have to ask ourselves, A, what risks are we willing to take? And B, what is that going to cost us in our health and in the long run damage to our community? And is that really worth it? Or would we rather have our tax dollars go to defend us, to protect us? So that's where, you know, people look at it as purely economic. I look at it as the economics means that you're willing to take risks and you're willing to be paid, you know, for some of those risks. But at the end of the day, is that a risk you're willing to take, and is the money really worth it? My opinion.
There was another question from a citizen just asking, if you participate in the hearing, can citizens be cross-examined?
Yes. It is very unlikely that the average citizen is going to be cross-examined. You can cross-examine Olympus and any of their witnesses. That's what a public hearing is. So if there are those among you who are attorneys or who have an interest or who have just a general all around good knowledge, and you want to cross-examine any one of their witnesses and you feel like you want to do that, you're welcome to do it. I don't want people to feel as though the average Jane or John Doe who gets up to offer comment, you're not going to get cross-examined. Perhaps Joe and Tim might get cross-examined because they've done all the research, they're raising all these technical questions. And that's okay, because people like Joe and Tim, they either know the answer or they're under oath going to say, I don't know the answer. I'm not an expert, but here's what I read. You know, so I would caution people, you know, I mention it because it is something that's written into the rule book for public hearings, but I've been doing this for 25 years. I've never seen any regular citizen be cross-examined. People like me, Tim and Joe, yes, but not a regular person who steps up to the microphone with a sincere concern. I don't think that's going to happen.
I think we've addressed the questions that I saw in the chat and that we received.
We have one more. Sorry to interrupt you, Vanessa.
No.
We had a question about potential mine subsidence. And Joe's actually done a bit of research on this. So the question was, we live on Hemlock Street. One of our many concerns are with the issue of the coal mines in the area. Have there been any recorded issues with collapses or subsidence with standing structures?
So the data on that was really, really hard to find. They don't report on mine subsidence claims due to privacy concerns with landowners. So when people pay for mine subsidence insurance, which we recommend that everybody in West Deer get mine subsidence insurance. You can look that up on the DEP website. When people have those claims, they don't really put together that information and report it publicly due to that, you know, making things tough on landowners to, you know, deal with the issues that have happened to their house. What they did start doing in 1994 is the DEP started putting together a report every 5 years on the impacts of mining in the state. And that report includes just general data about how many claims there were and of what type they were, and general geographic areas, but no specifics for addresses. And the reports, I think it went from like 2013 to 2018. I looked back through all of them because I was trying to Sherlock Holmes my way into some sort of, you know, interesting revelation. But the only thing I could find from it was that there has been an increase in claims on homes over abandoned mines. So like the report from 10 years ago had very, very few, and then that number had jumped. I think it went from like 10 to 60 or something like that. There was a pretty significant jump in mine subsidence claims on homes. Usually mine subsidence happens where there's active longwall mining under your home and they're, you know, like moving the machines through and your home will subside. It's been pretty rare for it to happen in places like West Deer where the mining is completely finished. But there has been this increase. No research as to whether unconventional drilling has had anything to do with that, except I did look into the area where they had a lot of these claims over mined out abandoned mines, and it was in Charleroi, and there were unconventional drill sites, under that neighborhood where they had mine subsidence. So it's completely anecdotal. The DEP is not doing any research on it whatsoever. It's just, something a lot of people have been asking about. And so I spent a deep dive on it.
Yeah, Lisa, to kind of circle back a little bit on the question about what type of events could happen that would require evacuation or, might concern community residents. It came to my mind that the Trax Farm incident, which I know you're very familiar with. So, worst case is that blowout, but there are things that aren't blowouts that
Right.
are very concerning as well.
That's right. This was an EQT site near Trax Farm, actually on Trax Farm, and the adjacent road is called Cardox Road. And it was a winter night. You're familiar with these nights in Western Pennsylvania where there was snow on the ground. It had rained and it had created sort of a fog. So, it looked sort of foggy outside to begin with. So the one gentleman walked the length of his very long driveway to his mailbox, not smelling anything or knowing anything, but by the time he turned around, he could hardly get back into the house. He actually literally crawled back into his house. He thought he was having a heart attack, was rushed to the hospital, and they found out later that he was actually being asphyxiated. There was a release. I don't remember if it was hydrogen sulfide or something like that that sucks the oxygen out of the air, basically. And it was a release from the well pad, from the drilling operation and the well pad. And he had, they were like flat red, like blood blisters all over his neck or his chest and his neck area. And that's how they knew that he almost was asphyxiated. And so when that happened, EQT was notified, and their response, and I kid you not, I have the documents to prove it. They knocked on all the families' doors. There are about maybe 10 or 12 families there, and they offered them $40,000 to never speak of the incident again, and none of their heirs could ever speak about the incident again. A number of the families signed it. Some did not and gave us a copy of the document. They also entered it into the record at the public hearing in Jefferson Hills, who was considering a well pad that EQT proposed in Jefferson Hills. And that was part of the reason why Jefferson Hills denied. And they ended up in court. Jefferson Hills did end up in court because they denied the well pad for a host of reasons. That was one of them. And they lost at county court, they lost at state court, but they challenged a piece of what we did by bringing, and this is important, this could relate to what you're doing. We brought in families from Union Township, which was one of the gentlemen was this man who told about being asphyxiated, and they told their story. And there had never been a legal ruling on what constitutes burden of proof on the objectors, which is what we would be at the public hearing. And so they hired John Smith, who's a renowned Western Pennsylvania lawyer on oil and gas and land use. Jefferson Hills hired him as special counsel. He petitioned for part of that case to be heard by the PA Supreme Court, which it was. And in May of 2019, we got a ruling that the testimony that our team brought from Union Township, this gentleman's story and others like it, that Jefferson Hills used in determining it was not in the best interest of public health, safety, and welfare, and they denied the application. We won, and that is now precedent-setting law, that you can have people testify from other communities that have experienced that same company's work and how they were treated, what sort of impacts happened in their community. And the PA Supreme Court ruled in a 6-1 ruling, which is very, very irregular. They never have that many in unison. They ruled that our testimony was not only probative, but was relative, and it should be considered. So that is now part of Pennsylvania law, that it's the Jefferson Hills versus EQT. So that is something that we could consider doing, finding people from other communities that have lived through Olympus's process, and they can tell their stories about what it was like. And if anyone questions it, we just point to the PA Supreme Court case, because those stories are factual, and those stories really show what it's like to be on the front line when that community is introduced to a process by that same company.
Okay.
Not
Tim,
every,
were there any?
not every case is that extreme, but you know, it is something worthwhile mentioning because lots of things can go wrong. This is an industrial, highly industrialized operation with multifaceted pieces of highly industrialized operations that are being introduced into residential neighborhoods. And I will share this because John Smith has shared this with a number of us on other webinars, but John Smith relates it this way. He said, this would be the equivalent of if McDonald's came to every community in Western Pennsylvania and said, we want to offer franchises to everybody who wants one because they want to make money. They want to put a McDonald's on their front lawn. And we want you to do that. We want you to allow that in all zones, residential, industrial, business park, you know, conservation district, everything. We want it all built out with McDonald's. First of all, they would never allow it. And second of all, you have to ask yourself, if you wouldn't allow McDonald's to show up in every zoning district, why on earth would you allow industrial sites to show up like that? And that's what they're asking to do. They're asking for the rules to be changed to allow them to accommodate leaseholders instead of saying, is that a proper land use that really should be placed there, or should it be placed elsewhere? And again, the local government can only say where, they can't say how. But where is a very, very important piece of this puzzle.
There was a question from Kathy about the impact of these developments on existing transmission lines that people have. And I guess a couple things about that. If you have gas service from you know, the natural gas company, there would be no impact. Something you might want to be concerned about, and I know this is an issue for at least some West Deer residents, if you have your own shallow well, your own private gas well, that you get gas to heat your home and cook and whatever else from, which, you know, probably not a lot of us have, but at least some of us do. It's likely that the DEP doesn't even know that you have that gas well, which means that Olympus doesn't know that you have that gas well. They are supposed to do monitoring on known shallow wells in the area of these developments, which obviously if they don't know that it's there, they won't be doing. But if they have any sort of issue that's unexpected, if they have a leak in their casing, it could cause pressures in surrounding shallow wells to spike dangerously high. This issue has happened in the region before, to where I'm not sure what the operator was, but they had to flare all of the shallow wells in this area for, Lisa, you know what I'm talking about, right?
I'm not as familiar with that, Tim, I have to say.
I think this was maybe Westmoreland County, where there was a loss of control of the well, which caused pressure spikes, and they had to burn off the gas that was now under very high pressure in the local shallow wells or conventional wells to basically keep them from exploding and blowing up people's houses. I'll see if I can find a link to that.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like someone's saying that was in Westmoreland County, so I think I'm right about that.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with that, so I'm sorry, I can't add to that, sorry.
Well, Lisa, up until now, you've been an encyclopedia of very good information.
We'll have to look that one up and send it to you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't do my homework on that one, I apologize.
Okay, sorry. Were there other questions, Tim, that you saw, or other concerns that you wanted to have answered before we wrap up?
We had a good question from Jack. He said, after the planning meeting, we were told the only legal ground the township has is the zoning ordinance. If so, how valuable is any other information in the hearing? So Lisa, you've been doing this for a long time. You probably have better insight than we do. What would you say?
So I want to make sure I understand this. Like, so there's different pieces, there are different levels of jurisdiction, right? So there, on one hand, there is the local zoning ordinance and the zoning map. So the map shows all the districts like industrial, residential, business park, what have you. It has a definition as to what's allowed in each one of those districts. And then there's an ordinance that goes with that, that takes just not the pictorial version of the zoning districts, but it goes through very detailed text and definitions as to what's allowed based on the written ordinance. So there's that part of it. And it's important to mention that what you have on the books right now is what adheres to these applications. They're undergoing a process where they're redoing their oil and gas ordinance along with every other ordinance, but that can't be considered part of this. It's whatever application, when the application comes in, whatever ordinance is on the books is the one that attaches. So there's that part of the equation that has to be considered in reviewing the application. However, there's still the municipal planning code part of it, which is the umbrella that goes over everything. So it's almost, if you think about the umbrella is the state version, the municipal planning code tells local government what it can and cannot do. And then each one of the spokes off the umbrella are the different pieces. You know, what do they do when there's a hearing? There's a rule for that. What do they do, you know, for setting up a board or a planning commission or things like that? They all sort of work together. It's not just the ordinance, but it's the municipal planning code and the ordinance that has to work together in order to make sure that they're making a factually informed decision. And so it's not just focusing on the ordinance is okay for part of the conversation, but it also has to be elevated to what's the overarching rule, and it's the MPC. I hope I answered the question. Is that?
Yeah, and I think that's why, Lisa, earlier you were talking about the precedent being set in another area that you worked in, that the experiences of local residents when it came to their health and well-being and safety were important to the conversation as well, because they spoke to the experiences that your community could have in working with this company. And that's why you can sort of have an expanded conversation.
Right, right.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. You don't have to be an expert. You don't even need to know our ordinances to make a comment. Whatever is your own feeling about these wells, whether it's health and safety, whether it's traffic, whether it's air pollution and climate change, whatever your feelings are valid, and you should bring that with you to speak to whatever is inside of you that you want to put out there. So if it's technical and it's ordinance related, fine. But if it's related to health impacts on children, just as important. We need all of it. All of our perspectives are important, and that's really what we're driving at. And our whole purpose for having this is our goal is to have every single person in West Deer know about this and come to the public hearing and tell us what you think about it. You know, honestly, whatever your opinion is, come out and say how you feel about it. You're collectively, all of our comments that we'll make to the supervisors of that are going to carry an insurmountable amount of weight. I mean,
Right.
I can't say enough about the impact we can have as a community just based on our own feelings about this issue. So that's.
It's also just important as a closing note, you know, this isn't already decided. They're going to hear the evidence at the public hearing. It's a kind of a different makeup to the board than we've ever had. You know, some different people than the ones that are usually on there for 6-year terms and then take their year off and then get on for another 6-year term. We hear a lot of people say that, you know, this is already decided. You can tell they're just going through the motions. It does kind of look a little bit like they're going through the motions, but that's because there's a very specific legal framework to the way it has to work. And, you know, like I said at the very beginning, they can't just tell this company to get lost. We don't want this. They have to give them their time and their due consideration. So I
Right.
just encourage you to let everybody know that, you know, it makes a difference to show up and say what you think about this.
Right. And if I can add one little thing to that, even if you don't know what to say, but you have questions, put all your questions down and hand them the list of unanswered questions. I'm concerned about, you know, like in Fort Cherry, they have one school building and all the students are there at one time. They don't have enough buses to get them all out of there. They have to run it in shifts. So the big concern there was what happens if there's a well blowout and they're surrounded by wells? You know, so if you have a list of questions, and Tim's right, you don't have to be an attorney, an engineer, a geologist, none of that. You're a concerned resident, tell what your concerns are. If you need help with that, attend some of the crowd meetings that we're going to have. If we need to have a preparatory session before the public hearing, we can always do that on Zoom. There are people who are willing to help you if you want the help. If you just want to show up and just say, here are the concerns on my heart. Tim is right that when all of the testimony is in, the solicitor will likely advise their client, which is the Board of Supervisors, to weight the information from the local residents who are directly impacted very high in their consideration. So it does matter, you being there in person and you being a part of the community, sharing your concerns and doing it in a factual and professional manner, it really gets their attention. It shows the solidarity and it gives them the support they might need if they have to make a tough call. So, you know, come one, come all. This is your speak now or forever hold your peace moment. And there are lots of people in your community that are willing to help you. Just please step forward. We need everybody.
All right, well, that was an amazing meeting. I am really excited to have been a part of it. I know that, you know, our board members in our communities are part of our community too. So always remember that, and that respectful, fact-based information is always super helpful. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and thank you to the panel members who came out and provided really important information. And please feel free to join the crowd meeting coming up. There was information in the chat about that. So thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot. Have a good
everybody.
night.